Everyone, what's up and welcome back to another lesson of the Crushing Small Stakes PLO course. In today's episode, we're going to learn more about facing a 3-bet out of position, which is a pre-flop action again, same as last week where we jumped into big blind defending out of position versus one raiser. If you haven't checked it out, make sure to do so. I spoke about the importance of understanding this topic and why we have to play differently when it comes to passive pre-flop actions at low stakes in comparison to mid and high stakes. Today, again, it's all about a pre-flop action facing a 3-bet when we are out of position. And again, I will mainly focus on a passive action, which is calling here. Okay, so first things first, why is calling too often out of position against a 3-bet such a big of a mistake? Especially at low stakes, this is important to understand more about. The first reason why we don't want to call too often out of position versus a 3-bet is because it's hard to realize our equity when we're out of position. We're going to check very often versus to the in position 3-better, who is the aggressive pre-flop. He's going to do a lot of betting on the flop, and therefore he's in an advantage with a stronger range. He has the initiative there, and it's hard for us to realize our equity there. He's doing a lot of betting. He has a stronger range. We're out of position. We're going to do a lot of checking to him. And this is always a disadvantage for the player out of position. So also in 3-bet pots, it is the case. And you therefore want to be selective, have as strong as possible of a range, connect to as many flops as possible. And therefore you will be able to stack off enough often or being able to continue versus a bet often enough. One of the worst case scenarios is calling too often versus a 3-bet and then having to check fold on the flop too often. This is a big recipe for losing a lot of money. Secondly, the rake is high and therefore passive action should be tightened up at low stakes. I already spoke about this pre-flop, not pre-flop, in the previous lesson where I was talking about the importance of being aware of passive pre-flop actions at low stakes. When the rake is high, you want to have the possibility as often as possible pre-flop to take down the pot because that allows you to not having to pay any rake. If you're calling pre-flop or calling versus a 3-bet pre-flop, you're always going to pay that rake because you don't have any fold equity and you're guaranteed to see the flop. So be aware of that. There are large differences when it comes to passive actions between all different rake levels. Okay, let's look into fold versus 3-bet out of position by position actually and compare here some important takeaways. If you look at early position versus MP, so you are the one open raising from early position, middle position comes in for the 3-bet, everyone folds and the action is back to you. At low stakes, you're actually supposed to fold 48.8% of the time. At mid stakes, 31.8% and at high stakes, 26%. So again, here you see large differences in passive preflop actions comparing different stake levels, different rake levels as well. Again, the 3-bet range that we're facing is very similar. It's all around 5% here. The RFI range that the early position player has is very similar on all these levels, around 16, 17% there. But again, the differences with our response is extremely different, and that is because of the rake impact. Secondly, cutoff versus button. So you open raising the cutoff and the button comes in for the 3-bet. Again, he's 3-betting around 8% on all these levels. We are open raising around 30% on all these levels. But the differences are super large. 40% folding at low stakes, 21% at mid stakes, and only 16% at high stakes. If we then lastly compare small blind versus big blind, again, 37% folding at low stakes, 26.5 at mid stakes, and 16.7 at high stakes. So basically, all these rake levels play very differently when you do get 3-bet. And be aware that if you play actually low stakes, where the rake is high, you should fold very, very often. Okay, let's look at some population tendencies here when it comes to the situation at hand here. So how often is the population folding versus a 3-bet, and compare this to the GTO outcomes. So early position versus MP, we already learned in the previous slide that the green bar here shows that early position versus MP, we should actually fold 49%. But the population tendency is to only fold 17% of the time here. So a very, very big difference. Cutoff versus button. We are supposed to fold 41% of the time, but we're actually only folding 20%. So again, Big differences here. Twice as often we are supposed to fold than we actually doing now. Later in the course, I will jump deeper into this topic. I will learn all of you and teach you how to 3-bet correctly versus players that don't fold or that have very low fold frequencies. But today be aware that if you are the one getting 3-bet, you should fold actually very often here. And that is like too many players believe you can call any hand in PLO. This is one of the main flaws in PLO, one of the principles people think is true, but it's actually not. Make sure that folding in PLO versus 3-bet is a big part of the strategy. Players don't pay enough attention to 3-bet ranges. They often call like the same amount of hands no matter what. They don't make a distinction between a tight range and a wider 3-bet range, and all this has a big impact on the strategy again. Players do not think ahead when raising first in. Also important, I want all of you to default to the following ID. Whenever you open raise a hand, already try to think ahead. What would I do versus a 3-bet? Try to answer that question. It will help you to also play a better raise first in strategy. Folding against a 3-bet must be a big part of your strategy. I cannot highlight this enough and tell you enough. Like I see people calling all sorts of random hands, disconnected, high pairs, low pairs, single suited ones, all trashy hands that should actually be folded. Make sure that folding against a 3-bet should be a super big part of your strategy, and it's extremely important. You will win more money by folding. Basically, you will lose less money by folding. That's how I would like to address it here. Okay, let's look into some examples here. High pairs, fold versus 3-bet out of position. Here you see an overview with how high pairs should be played accordingly to the strength. If we're playing early position versus MP in the blue bars, cutoff versus button in the green bars, you can see that kings, queens, jacks, and tens, they are on average here almost always folding around 50%. The marks there are hovering around 50%. Kings a little bit more often, early position versus MP 3-bet, but in general, it's hovering around 50%. And I'm pretty sure that's not how people play. People call high pairs too often here. High pairs have low equity versus aces. I mean, imagine you have kings and you get 3-bet against first by aces. I mean, your hand just doesn't do too well there. Same with queens, jacks, and tens. You are far behind here in terms of equity. And secondly, you have bad playability post-flop, especially these high pairs, which is the focus of today because many players make mistakes there a lot. High pairs have problems having playability post-flop. It's hard to realize their equity because often they end up having, for example, a bear overpair or a queen high flush draw, for example. And then it's up to you. Like your opponent is betting, and are you willing to stack off there with your queen high flush draw or with your bear overpair of kings versus a range that is very much focused on aces? I mean, it's difficult, and therefore we are better off folding a lot of these pairs pre-flop instead of taking them to the flop. Here are some examples of hands that many of you will actually call at the moment, I assume, but that are actually supposed to fold. Hands like king, king, jack, 7. Too many gaps in there. You should fold them. Ace, queen, queen, 6. Too gappy, but also unsuited to the ace. This is a hand you want to fold. Ace, king, jack, jack. Very connected, but rainbow, and therefore this hand is also supposed to be a fold. And ask yourself, are you folding these hands yourself, or would you call this against the 3-bet? Okay, let's look into some examples that we are actually supposed to make the call with high pairs. What are the principles and focus points that I want you to remember after this lesson? First of all, double suited high pairs are almost always a call. Hand like king, king, 3, 6 or ace, 10, 10 deuce, double suited are good enough. You will have more post-flop playability, of course, because you have now 2 suits instead of 1. It's easier to realize your equity and you have more potential going to the flop. So double suited hands, if you did open raise them, double suited high pairs, sorry, if you did open raise them and face a 3-bet, you're almost always supposed to go for the call. And of course, sometimes you want to 4-bet some of them, but that's not necessarily the topic of this slide. We're talking about calling, of course. Secondly, double paired. If you open raise a double paired hand and get 3-bet, these hands do make up for a good call. You have twice as many outs to hit a set, of course. You will have more playability post-flop, and you have more potential going to the flop. I think many of you do play that category correct here. Strongly connected single-suited hands. Queen, queen, jack 10, jack 10, 10, 9. Like these hands, clear call. I'm pretty sure all of you are calling this. But this is actually sort of the threshold. Like you don't want to call weaker combinations with a lot of gaps. For example, Jack 10, Jack 10, 10, 7, Queen, Queen, 10, 7, Queen, Queen, 10, 6 with one suit. Like those hands aren't supposed to be a call and should fold. Like strongly connected single suited high pairs are fine if they are extremely strong connected. If not, then you should definitely fold them because you're up against a strong tight range that is going to dominate you and outplay you post flop the majority of the time. And lastly, if you have a hand that is single suited to the ace, you have much more potential and you can often come in for the call. Especially if you have ace king king, ace queen queen suited to the ace, your hand is almost always supposed to be a call. If you have ace jack jack or ace 10 10 suited to the ace, you should be a little bit more selective because the strength of the pair is lower, of course. It's a weaker pair and therefore you need some additional connectivity. So the fourth side card should actually be connected to the pair. So for example, ace 10 10 9 is a good combination. Ace jack jack 9, ace jack jack 10, like those hands are fine. But don't let that side card, that fourth side card, slip away too much and make it a low card because then you're often supposed to fold. So if you want, you can take a screenshot here and put these 4 elements into your system. Try to remember them because it's important to remember this when you're playing and when you face a 3-bet with a high pair. Let's look at the takeaways of today's lesson before wrapping up this session here. We learned that folding must be a big part of your strategy at low stakes, especially because it's a passive pre-flop action. We must play much more careful than at mid or high stakes. Out of position, facing a 3-bet, there is much more folding. Facing a 3-bet versus being in position, you can find this information later on in the pre-flop chart. We should 4-bet more when we're out of position. You can also learn more about the pre-flop chart in another episode. And high pairs generally don't match up great against 3-bet ranges. We need a multi-component hand in order to continue against a 3-bet range with these high pairs. This is important, of course. Keep that in mind. And we're looking out for being double suited, strongly connected when single suited, having the ace high suit, or being double paired. Like these elements is what you're looking for with high pairs. Okay, guys, that's going to wrap up today's lesson. Hope you enjoyed it. Any questions, use the comment section below. As mentioned here, a pre-flop chart will follow soon. There's a lesson about that coming, and I will explain all about that in there. Okay, take care, have a great day, and I hope to see you soon with another episode here. Bye-bye.